It was a quiet Tuesday, and she was in the kitchen humming something soft and familiar, like a song I couldn't place. I smiled at her from the doorway, thinking I'd catch her in a silly moment, but she didn't even glance up. "Everything okay?" I asked, voice almost too casual, trying to mask the sudden panic rising in my chest. She froze mid-step, hand hovering over the coffee machine. Then, with a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes, she said, "Yeah. Just tired, I guess." Tired. That word landed differently than it ever had before. There was something in the way she said it, careful, measured, like she was rehearsing it. Something that made me hesitate at the threshold, like I was walking into a room I didn't fully belong in anymore. I wanted to ask more, but the words got stuck somewhere between my throat and my gut. I nodded, forced a grin, and walked away, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the silence she left behind felt heavy, almost accusatory. The rest of the day felt off. I noticed the way her phone buzzed and she glanced at it a second too long, the way she'd sigh whenever I mentioned my plans for the weekend, tiny ticks I'd ignored for years. Each one chipped at a growing unease I couldn't shake. I told myself it was just stress, that work, life, or even the house renovation could explain it. But something about the way she moved, the way she avoided certain topics, made me feel like I was missing pieces of a puzzle I wasn't allowed to see. Something had shifted between us. And I had no idea how far it had gone, or who else might already be involved. We'd been together for 7 years, married for 4, and for most of that time, I thought we understood each other completely. She had this way of filling a room without saying much, just moving through it, humming under her breath, making the ordinary feel deliberate. I liked that about her, the subtlety, the rhythm of her presence. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Weekends were spent in half-hearted DIY projects, grocery runs that turned into coffee breaks, and evenings on the couch, both of us scrolling on our phones but occasionally exchanging a glance that said more than words could. Those little moments, they mattered. At least, they had. She was meticulous in ways I couldn't match, calendars color-coded. Bills paid days in advance, groceries always stocked just right. I was more spontaneous, a little messy, and she tolerated it, even joked about it. I used to think that balance was why we worked, but lately, even the balance felt off. Things I'd brushed aside, her sudden irritability over trivial matters, the way she sometimes avoided eye contact during conversations, started stacking up. I blamed myself at first, thinking maybe I'd drifted, maybe my jokes were too sharp, my absence too frequent. Still, there were the moments that reminded me of why I loved her, the way she laughed at nothing, her hand finding mine in the car without asking, the little sticky notes she left on the fridge with random encouragements. Those moments kept me anchored, made me fight the creeping anxiety that something was slipping through my fingers. I wanted to believe it was just stress, that the long hours at work and the relentless responsibilities were taking a toll on both of us. But the unease gnawed at me, subtle but persistent, like a whisper I couldn't ignore. Something was happening in the spaces between our routines, something I hadn't seen coming, and I didn't yet know who or what was on the other side of it. Some nights, I'd lie awake just listening. The faint creak of the floorboards as she moved through the apartment, the soft clink of her dishes in the kitchen, the occasional sigh that didn't match any conversation we'd had. I told myself it was normal, just the sounds of a life shared with someone. But even in the quiet, something felt off. She'd call me during the day sometimes, just to chat, and I'd notice a slight pause before she spoke, like she was thinking twice about what to say. Or the way she laughed a little too loudly at my jokes, almost performatively. Small things. Tiny shifts in tone or glance that didn't fit the pattern I'd memorized over years. I caught myself watching her more often than I should have. Not in a controlling way, at least, that's what I kept telling myself, but because the feeling of missing something made my chest tighten. I'd noticed the way she held her phone just a little closer to her, or how she'd brush past me in the hallway without meeting my eyes. One evening, I asked casually, "Everything all right at work today?" She smiled, nodded, and said, "Yeah, it's fine. Nothing to worry about." But the way she said it, just slightly too fast, made my stomach twist. I wanted to trust her completely, to assume it was nothing. After all, she had never given me a reason not to. But trust and intuition aren't always on the same page. And there was a tension in the apartment that hadn't been there before, an invisible line I kept bumping into. Unsure if it was real or if I was imagining it, it was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. But small things accumulate, and by the time you realize it, the air between you has shifted. Something was growing in that space, and I couldn't tell whether it was fear, guilt, or a truth I wasn't ready to see yet. It started with little things that didn't make sense. A text message that she left open on the counter, the kind that vanished too quickly for me to read. Or the way she'd suddenly close her laptop when I entered the room, like I had interrupted something delicate, though I couldn't see what. I tried to rationalize. Maybe she was just tired, overworked, stressed. I told myself I was imagining patterns that weren't there. But my gut didn't listen. Every little pause, every sideways glance, gnawed at the edges of my calm. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. The apartment smelled faintly of something sweet, cinnamon, or maybe vanilla, but it wasn't the scent she usually used. She was in the living room, scrolling on her phone, smiling just slightly. "Hey," she said. "You're home early." Her tone was casual, but there was a tension in it, like she'd been interrupted mid-thought. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound normal. "Yeah," she said, waving it off. "Just catching up on some things." Her words didn't match the quick flicker of her eyes, the brief clench of her jaw. I stayed in the doorway for a moment, frozen, studying the way her fingers hovered over the screen. I wanted to ask more, to dig, to push. But I swallowed it. I told myself she had her privacy, that maybe I was overthinking, but over the next few weeks, the inconsistencies piled up. Slightly altered routines, whispered phone calls that stopped when I walked by, faint laughter from the other room when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Nothing concrete. Nothing I could prove. Just an undercurrent of unease that grew heavier every day, and every time I tried to confront it, she'd smile, shake her head, and insist it was just stress, just a rough patch. I wanted to believe her, desperately. But the feeling of being on the outside of her thoughts, of something shifting quietly behind a locked door, refused to let me rest. Then came the day I noticed her notebook, left open on the coffee table. I hadn't meant to look, but something about the way it was angled drew my eyes. Inside were pages of lists, scribbles, and reminders, innocuous at first glance, but then I saw one line that made my heart hitch: "Don't let him know yet." I stared at it for a long moment, trying to force it into context. Maybe it was work-related. Maybe it was about her family. I tried to calm myself, telling myself I had no right to pry into her thoughts, but curiosity gnawed at me like acid. A few days later, I noticed a pattern in her errands. She'd disappear for an hour or two, sometimes more, without a clear explanation. Grocery store trips that didn't line up with our usual schedule. Visits to the dry cleaner, the pharmacy. Odd little detours that didn't add up. The first thought that came to mind was stress, of course. Maybe she was just trying to manage everything herself, lighten the load on me. Maybe she felt guilty for asking for help. But another thought crept in, one I hated. What if she was hiding something from me entirely? I caught myself checking her social media occasionally, hoping for a clue. Nothing obvious appeared, no messages, no photos, nothing to confirm or deny my growing unease. Yet the notebook lingered in my mind, a small, stubborn proof that something was amiss. By the end of the week, I convinced myself I'd figured it out. She wasn't cheating, I told myself. No, it had to be something else. Maybe she'd taken on a secret hobby, a side project she didn't want me to know about. Maybe she was secretly planning a surprise for me, something big. That thought calmed me, just enough to push suspicion aside, at least temporarily, but deep down, even as I smiled and nodded at her explanations, the seed of doubt had already been planted. And seeds, once planted, tend to grow whether you want them to or not. The next few weeks were like walking through fog. Every interaction felt layered, every glance uncertain. She would smile at me during dinner, but then her phone would buzz, and she'd retreat just enough for me to notice. I tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was work. Maybe it really was just stress. I clung to that idea like a lifeline. One night, I found a receipt tucked between the couch cushions. It was for a spa I didn't know we had a membership at, a date that didn't coincide with any of our usual plans. I held it in my hand for what felt like minutes, flipping it over, searching for context. When I asked her casually the next morning, she laughed and said, "Oh, that? Just a gift certificate a friend gave me. Thought I'd treat myself." Her tone was light, effortless, but that small laugh didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to believe her. I really did. I told myself it was innocent. Maybe she just needed a moment for herself. But the knot in my stomach refused to loosen, tightening each time I caught her hiding something so trivial, so easily explained. Even our conversation started to feel like a game I couldn't win. She'd dodge questions, change subjects mid-sentence, or laugh off concerns I didn't even voice out loud. I found myself rereading our texts, trying to find hidden meanings that weren't there, or maybe were. The tension started to seep into everything. The apartment felt smaller. Shared spaces felt like mine to navigate carefully. The smile I once associated with warmth began to feel like a mask, and I wondered how long I'd been missing the cracks beneath it, and yet, in moments when she reached for my hand or kissed me softly, hope surged. Maybe it really was just stress. Maybe I was imagining it all. But the hope was fragile, fragile enough that I feared it might shatter the moment I looked too closely. It finally clicked, or so I thought. After weeks of careful observation, tiny inconsistencies, and a growing pit in my stomach, I convinced myself I had the answer. She wasn't hiding anything dangerous, immoral, or malicious. No, the truth was simpler, or so it seemed. Her stress, the furtive glances, the small disappearances, they were all connected to her health. She'd been dealing with anxiety, maybe even minor panic attacks, something she didn't want to burden me with. That explained the late-night pacing, the notebook, the random errands. She had been trying to manage it quietly, keeping her fragile sense of stability intact, while pretending everything was normal for my sake. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, almost guilt mingled with it. How could I have doubted her so thoroughly? How could I have let suspicion creep into every thought, twisting ordinary actions into potential betrayals? That weekend, I tried to make things right, or at least, what I thought was right. I cooked dinner, poured wine, and sat across from her, smiling with a careful warmth. "You've been under a lot of stress," I said gently. "I just want you to know I'm here for you. Always." She returned the smile, but there was a flicker in her eyes that made me hesitate. I brushed it off. Probably just tired. Probably just me overthinking again. For a few days, the tension eased. I allowed myself to believe everything was back to normal. I even felt a small, quiet hope that things could get better than they had been before. The anxiety, the doubts, the gnawing worry about secrets, and that's why it hurt even more when the next clue appeared. Something minor, almost laughable in isolation, but enough to crack the fragile certainty I'd just built. It was small, invisible to anyone else. But I noticed. And the notice changed everything. The small crack started widening again. It began with a smell, coffee, but not the kind we kept at home. Slightly stronger, sharper, almost too familiar, like someone else had brewed it. I asked her casually where it came from. She smiled, shrugged, and said, "Just a different blend. Thought I'd try something new." But the way she avoided my gaze, even for a second, triggered the old knot in my chest. I tried to push it aside. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, but ignoring it only made it louder, like a song stuck in reverse. Then came the messages. Not obvious, not on her phone, but snippets I overheard when she thought I was out of the room. Laughter. Small talk. Words that made my stomach tighten. Not work. Not friends, not family. Something else. Something deliberate. I watched her more closely. Not spying, I told myself, just noticing. Noticing the extra time in her car, the subtle tension in her shoulders when she returned, the way she quickly locked her laptop when I entered the room. Every small act, every evasive glance, piled onto the unease that had been quietly growing for months. I tried to confront it once, indirectly. "You've seemed distracted lately," I said one night. She smiled, touching my arm lightly. It's just stress, I promise. You know I've been juggling a lot. Her words were smooth, practiced, and yet. I caught it again. The flicker in her eyes that didn't match the words. Hope and denial battled inside me. I wanted so badly to believe her, to maintain the life we'd built. But the tension was relentless, gnawing at the edges of every moment we shared. Something was happening behind a door I couldn't see, and the more I pretended it wasn't there, the heavier it pressed against me. It was late one night when it finally hit me just how tangled everything had become. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, half awake, half drifting into panic, when I realized how little I actually knew about her days lately. Every routine I thought I understood had changed. Every casual explanation she gave felt rehearsed. I went through our apartment like a detective, retracing her steps, trying to find patterns. The empty coffee mugs, her phone left face down on the counter, a receipt for a restaurant neither of us had ever been to, it all added up, piece by piece, until my chest felt like it would split. I confronted myself as much as her. Am I imagining this? Am I paranoid? I asked over and over in the silence of the apartment. The answer refused to come. The next morning, I tried to act normal, laughing at her jokes, brushing off the gnawing suspicion as irrational. But she caught me staring too long at her hands, the way she fidgeted with her bracelet. For a moment, her eyes flickered, not the tired, strained eyes of someone overworked, but something else. Something careful. I wanted to speak, to ask directly what was going on, but the words refused to leave my mouth. Fear tangled with hope, and hope tangled with guilt. If I was wrong, if I accused her unfairly, it would destroy everything we'd built. But staying silent felt like drowning slowly in a room full of whispers I couldn't decipher. By the time she left for work that day, I was shaking slightly, trying to convince myself I had nothing to fear. But every footstep she took toward the door sounded like a countdown, each one echoing a truth I wasn't ready to face, and then I saw it, a text, a name, a detail that made my world narrow to a pinpoint of disbelief. I couldn't look away. I didn't want to. Something had been relieving her stress all along. And it wasn't me. I couldn't breathe. The message was short, casual almost, but the weight of it pressed down on me like I'd been holding my own chest in place for months without knowing. Her stress. The distance she had blamed on work, on life, on everything I could accept, it wasn't stress at all. It was him. I replayed every moment I'd ignored, every instinct I'd pushed aside. The extra errands, the lingering glances, the faint laughter from rooms I thought were empty, it all fell into place, terrifyingly clear. She hadn't just been managing stress, she'd been outsourcing it. Someone else, someone I hadn't even suspected, had been taking the burden she pretended was mine. I felt dizzy standing there, holding my phone like it could anchor me. Memories I'd cherished, the quiet evenings, the little smiles, the moments I thought were intimate, suddenly felt like shadows of something else. Not lies, exactly, but omissions. Secrets woven into the life we had built together without my knowledge. I wanted to scream, to confront her immediately, but I couldn't. My mind was a whirlpool of disbelief, rage, and sorrow. I saw her later, humming in the kitchen, casually opening her laptop like nothing had changed. She looked up, smiled at me, and asked, "Did you have a good day?" I nodded, speechless, gripping the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing. Nothing about her demeanor hinted at the storm I now carried inside. Nothing except the faint, almost imperceptible flicker in her eyes, the same flicker I'd seen before, now glaringly obvious. For the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The person I loved, the life I thought I understood, had quietly shifted around me. And in the space between what I thought was reality and what actually was, I realized how little I had truly known her, or myself. The apartment felt heavier after that day. Every corner seemed to carry echoes of the truth I hadn't wanted to face. I moved through our routines like a ghost, performing familiar gestures, making coffee, folding laundry, scrolling through my phone, but everything felt meaningless, like I was playing a role in a life I no longer recognized. I avoided her eyes when I could. When she laughed or reached for me, a wave of nausea followed. The simplest acts of intimacy became impossible, tainted by the knowledge that someone else had been the one filling the space I thought was mine. I tried to talk to friends, but even their presence felt distant. Explaining it aloud made it sound absurd. Or worse, petty. How could I capture the complexity of betrayal that wasn't just about infidelity, but about trust, emotional labor, and the subtle ways a life could shift around you without your awareness? She noticed, of course. I could see it in the careful way she moved around me, in the pauses before she spoke, the quiet attempts to normalize what could no longer be normal. I wanted to confront her directly, to demand an explanation, but every time I opened my mouth, words failed me. The anger, the sorrow, the disbelief, it all crashed together, leaving only silence. Sleep became a battlefield. Nights filled with imagined conversations, imagined confessions, and imagined confrontations left me exhausted and raw. Yet even in that haze, a flicker of hope remained, hope that maybe this was a phase, that maybe understanding could come in fragments, slowly, and that life could somehow be salvaged, but hope felt fragile, almost cruel. The more I tried to hold it, the more it slipped through my fingers. And the question that haunted me in every quiet moment was the hardest one of all: how do you forgive someone for a distance you never chose, a relief you weren't allowed to provide, and a truth that had been hidden for an entire year? I still live in that apartment, moving through the routines that once felt comforting but now feel like hollow echoes. The kitchen still smells faintly of her coffee, but I don't reach for the mug the same way. The couch cushions still hold her weight, but the space between us feels permanent, unbridgeable. Some nights, I watch her from across the room, trying to read her expressions like a book I've suddenly forgotten how to read. She laughs, she hums, she moves with the same effortless rhythm I once adored, and I can't decide whether it's cruel or necessary that she's unaware of the storm she left behind. I keep asking myself questions I can't answer. Do I leave and reclaim the trust that was stolen by omission? Or do I stay and try to salvage what remains? Does staying make me complicit in my own pain, or is leaving an admission that I failed at love? And then there's the knowledge that someone else had relieved her stress for a year, someone I never knew, someone who occupied a space I assumed was mine. That knowledge gnaws at me, because it's not just betrayal. It's a quiet reshaping of reality, a proof that life can continue beside you without ever including you in its design. I've tried to talk to her, but the conversations never reached the heart of it. She insists it was stress, that nothing was meant to hurt me, that everything was circumstantial. And maybe it is. Maybe I'll never know the full truth. So I wait, trapped between fury and longing, between disbelief and a twisted hope that time might answer the questions I cannot. The real question isn't about her, or him, or what happened. The question is me. What do I do with the distance I never caused, the relief I never provided, and the love that feels both mine and forever out of reach?